They were smart, experienced, and prepared. Sandra vanished after crashing her car deep in a forest. Joel set out on a peaceful solo hike and was never seen again. Alice headed up Mount Whitney on a summer day and simply disappeared. No screams, no signals, no goodbyes, just silence. 3 hikers, 3 trails, 3 cold cases, each more disturbing than the last. So what's really happening inside America's most beautiful and most unforgiving wilderness? Let's begin. It was supposed to be a peaceful solo trip, a chance to breathe, reflect, and reset. Joel Thomazin, a devoted father and avid outdoorsman, set off into the Sierra National Forest in September 2021, carrying little more than his pack, a fishing pole, and his deep love for nature. But within days, that quiet trip would unravel into a mystery that remains unsolved. And the strange part isn't just that Joel vanished, it's how absolutely nothing was found after he did. Joel was 31 years old, a former wrestler, and someone who cherished time in the wilderness. Friends described him as grounded, disciplined, the kind of man who found strength in solitude and purpose in simplicity. He wasn't reckless. He didn't chase thrills. His joy came from small, intentional moments, especially when they took place outdoors. On September 3rd, 2021, Joel left his home in Denair, California, and drove toward the Sierra National Forest, a sprawling wilderness just south of Yosemite. His destination was a remote area near Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, known for its rugged trails and alpine lakes. He planned to hike solo, spend a few days fishing, and return home by the 6th. He never did. That evening, Joel parked his silver Hyundai at the trailhead. It was a typical early September day, warm, dry, and still. The forest was quiet, save for the rustling trees and the occasional bird call. Joel knew the terrain. He'd hiked and fished in similar areas before. This wasn't a dangerous expedition, just a short solo outing, well within his abilities. He signed the trail registry at the trailhead, a small but important detail that confirmed his presence and intended direction. And then he walked into the forest and disappeared. Joel's wife expected him home by Monday. When he didn't arrive and didn't call, she immediately contacted authorities. A formal search was launched the next day. Search crews from multiple counties, including Tuolumne and Yosemite, began their work quickly. They combed the trails on foot. Helicopters scanned the area from the air. Dogs were brought in. Every resource was deployed. Because in cases like this, time is everything. And the terrain Joel entered was as unforgiving as it was beautiful. The first unsettling sign came early in the search. Joel's car was still at the trailhead, locked, undisturbed. It hadn't been moved since he arrived. Nearby, no immediate clues were found. No dropped gear, no boot prints, no broken brush. Just the eerie quiet of a trailhead that had welcomed someone in, but never saw them come back out. As the search expanded, teams focused on the area Joel had marked in the trail registry. They covered miles of wilderness, rocky ridges, dense tree lines, and steep slopes leading down toward remote fishing spots. But there was nothing. No gear, no campsite, no food wrappers, no fishing equipment, not even a single piece of clothing. It was as if Joel had simply vanished into the landscape. This troubled investigators deeply. In most missing hiker cases, even in the harshest terrain, something is found. A backpack, a fire ring, a footprint. But Joel left behind no trace. On the 3rd day, searchers focused on several backcountry lakes where Joel might have planned to fish. They explored Paiute Creek, the Beehive area, and even scouted places beyond the marked trails, places an experienced outdoorsman might go. But again, nothing. Not a sign he had even passed through. As days turned into a week, the sense of urgency deepened. The weather remained mild, which gave hope. Joel could have survived out there if injured or disoriented. He was fit. He was experienced, but he wasn't responding to calls. He hadn't left any notes, and no signals from a cell phone or GPS device were detected. Then, something strange came to light. Joel hadn't told many people exactly where he was going. His wife knew it was a solo trip. He had mentioned he would be fishing and likely wouldn't have cell service. But beyond that, the specifics were vague. He hadn't shared an exact trail name or campsite. And in wilderness areas like the Sierra National Forest, that vagueness can mean the difference between rescue and impossibility. Despite the best efforts of dozens of searchers over more than a week, no evidence was ever found. Not one piece of gear, No broken branches, no torn clothing. Even trained tracking dogs, highly effective in wilderness searches, picked up nothing of value. Eventually, the search was scaled back. But Joel's family never stopped looking. They returned to the area themselves. They handed out flyers, spoke to other hikers, searched side trails. Every time a lead came in, however small, they followed it. Still, no answers. And that's where the story becomes even more haunting. Because Joel Thomazin isn't the only person to vanish in this region without a trace. The Sierra Nevada mountain range has long been home to unexplained disappearances, many involving experienced hikers on short trips in good weather. These aren't people who got caught in sudden storms or fell victim to wildlife. These are people who left behind almost no evidence at all. It's a pattern, and it's one that doesn't make sense. Some theories have been proposed over the years. One of the most common is accidental injury, that Joel slipped, fell, and became incapacitated in a spot where rescuers simply couldn't find him. In wilderness terrain, that's always possible. But if so, why wasn't there any trace? No discarded backpack, no blood, no disturbance in the landscape. If he fell into a crevice or over a ridge, search teams would likely have seen some sign, especially with aerial support. Another theory is disorientation, that Joel may have lost the trail, wandered off course, and become lost. But again, nothing was ever found to support that. Even in cases where people get turned around, they tend to leave behind evidence, attempts to build shelter, fires, or signs of backtracking. The third, more unsettling possibility is that Joel encountered someone else in the forest, someone who meant him harm. But this theory, too, is thin on evidence. There were no reports of suspicious people in the area, no signs of a struggle, and Joel wasn't known to carry valuables or anything that might attract attention. It's a theory built more on the absence of facts than their presence. And then there's the most difficult possibility of all, that something unknown happened, something we don't have a word for, a sudden disappearance with no rational explanation. For Joel's family, the hardest part isn't just the lack of closure, it's the silence, the total absence of answers. Every year that passes brings the same pain, the same questions. Where did he go? What happened in those woods? Could he still be alive? Or is he now part of a landscape that refuses to give up its secrets? We often think of national parks and forests as safe escapes, and most of the time they are. But places like the Sierra have their own rules, their own history, and sometimes even the best prepared can vanish within them, without sound, without sign. Joel Thomazin walked into the forest with a plan, a short trip, a peaceful retreat. He didn't leave a farewell note. He wasn't in distress. He was simply a young father taking a weekend to reconnect with nature. But he never came home. And as of today, not a single piece of him, physical or digital, has surfaced. If you ever hike near Hetch Hetchy, you might see his face on a missing person flyer. You might pass the same trailhead where his car was parked, untouched, waiting. And you might wonder how a man could walk into that wilderness on a clear, dry day and simply never walk out. Maybe the woods took him. Maybe something else did. But either way, the silence that followed him remains. Quiet, heavy, and waiting to be broken. It was a clear September morning in California's Sierra National Forest. The air was crisp, the trails were quiet, and the trees stood tall under a cloudless sky. Alice Yu Shi, a 41-year-old woman with a calm presence and an adventurous spirit, had set out on a hike near the Kaiser Pass area. She was alone, well-prepared, and confident. But sometime that day, between the trailhead and the high ridges, she vanished. No one heard her call out. No one saw her leave the path. And to this day, no one knows where she went. Alice Shi was a familiar face in her community. She worked in the Bay Area, was passionate about the outdoors, and often took time for herself to hike and reflect. Her friends described her as peaceful, quiet, but not withdrawn. She loved being among trees, away from the noise of everyday life. It wasn't unusual for her to take solo day hikes in places like Yosemite or the Sierra Backcountry. But on September 24th, 2023, something unusual happened. Alice had traveled to the area around Kaiser Pass, near Huntington Lake in Fresno County. The elevation there climbs to over 9,000 feet. It's rugged country, dotted with alpine lakes and high trails that weave through granite cliffs. This isn't a place full of tourists or day trippers. It attracts people who know what they're doing. Alice was one of them. She brought her car, her pack, and her plans for a quiet walk through one of California's most isolated and breathtaking landscapes. She parked her vehicle at the White Bark Vista Trailhead, a spot that overlooks miles of high-elevation wilderness. She signed the trail register. Then she walked into the forest and was never seen again. When Alice didn't return that evening, her friends became concerned. She was responsible. She never wandered too far without telling someone. But her phone was silent. Messages went unanswered. And when she didn't check in by nightfall, a search effort was quickly put into motion. The Fresno County Sheriff's Office began the search on September 25th. They located her vehicle parked at the same spot she'd left it. The car was locked. Her personal items were inside. The area around it was undisturbed. There was no indication of panic, no signs of distress. Just a quiet car, waiting. Search teams fanned out across the trail network. They covered White Bark Vista, Potter Pass, and the surrounding ridgelines. Drones scanned the high ground. Helicopters flew grid patterns above the trees. Volunteers walked the trails. They shouted her name. They checked the creeks, the slopes, and the rocky ledges. But they found nothing. No backpack. No jacket. No boot prints. No water bottles. No broken branches. It was as if she had stepped off the trail and disappeared into thin air. And that, investigators would later say, was what made this case so troubling. People do get lost in the wilderness. That's a fact. Sometimes even experienced hikers take wrong turns, but in most cases there's a trail, a breadcrumb, something left behind. With Alice, there was nothing, not a single clue. The terrain she entered wasn't easy, but it wasn't especially dangerous either. The weather on that day was cool, stable, and dry. There were no signs of storms or sudden shifts in climate. Visibility was good. If she had slipped or fallen, rescuers believed there would have been evidence. A sound, a scuffle in the dirt, a dropped item. But the landscape remained untouched. Investigators dug deeper. Had she changed her hiking plan at the last minute? Was there a possibility she met someone along the trail? A stranger? A friend? But no hikers reported seeing her that day. And Alice hadn't posted anything unusual on social media. No farewell messages. No signs of distress. The most plausible theory at first was that she became disoriented, that perhaps she followed a deer trail instead of a marked path, wandered off course, and became trapped in a ravine or canyon. But search teams, aided by GPS mapping, thermal imaging, and tracking dogs, canvassed every plausible area, even the most remote pockets. Still, no trace. By the end of the first week, search and rescue teams had logged over 100 hours on foot, with air support flying daily. They interviewed hikers, double-checked the trail registry, and brought in additional personnel from neighboring counties. And yet, nothing changed. Her case began to draw quiet comparisons to other disappearances in the Sierra region. People who had gone missing without explanation. Men and women, often experienced, often alone, who entered the wilderness and simply never returned. Some were found months or years later. Others, like Alice, remain missing with no clues at all. There is something haunting about silence in the wilderness. We expect danger to come with noise, with warning. But sometimes the most unsettling thing is the absence of anything at all. One investigator later remarked that the forest around White Bark Vista gives nothing away. It's dense, varied, full of hidden pockets and shallow drop-offs. But even in that kind of landscape, total disappearances are rare, almost unheard of. After 10 days, the formal search was scaled back, but Alice's friends and loved ones never stopped looking. They returned to the forest on their own, handed out flyers, pushed for more awareness, posted updates online. They refused to let her story fade into the background. One friend described Alice's disappearance as a moment frozen in time, a day that never ended, a hike that never concluded, and a quiet reminder that even the safest seeming people in the safest seeming places can vanish without warning. The case of Alice Shee leaves behind questions that still echo. Did she encounter someone else out there? Someone with bad intentions? Did she wander into a patch of terrain no one thought to search? Did something sudden, some medical event or moment of confusion, take her off course? Or is there something else about that place, something harder to name, that sometimes swallows people without leaving a trace? We don't have answers. All we know is that Alice walked into the Sierra National Forest on a clear September morning and was never seen again. There's no ending here, no closure, just a quiet trailhead, a parked car, and a woman who vanished into one of California's most remote and mysterious places. And somewhere out there, beyond the cliffs, beneath the trees, that story is still waiting to be found. It started with a crash, a single vehicle accident deep in the California wilderness. But when first responders arrived, there was no driver, no blood, no clear path of escape, just a wrecked tent, scattered belongings, and silence. That was the last confirmed trace of 54-year-old Sandra Johnsen Hughes. Since then, nothing has made sense. What began as a simple search has spiraled into one of the strangest, most unsettling disappearances in national park history. Because Sandra didn't just vanish. She left a trail, half seen, half remembered, through the woods. And then, like smoke, she was gone. This is the story of Sandra Johnsen Hughes and the chilling mystery that still haunts the Sierra National Forest. Sandra wasn't just another weekend hiker. She had a purpose. In the summer of 2020, she'd packed up her life and set out to reconnect with nature, maybe even herself. She was going through a tough transition. Her father had passed away earlier that year, and she had recently lost her mother. Grief was heavy on her shoulders, but those who knew her say she wasn't running away. She was trying to heal. Sandra had a plan: camp out in the Sierra National Forest, just outside Yosemite, for some peace and quiet. She was smart, educated, a former nurse. And she wasn't new to the outdoors. She had trained in survival, knew first aid, and could read a map. This wasn't a reckless move. It was a personal journey, but it would be a journey she'd never return from. On July 4th, 2020, a hiker in the Sierra National Forest came across something disturbing. A campsite that looked like it had been hit by a storm, or something worse. It was scattered with torn gear, broken items, personal belongings thrown around with no clear reason. A Bible lay open in the dirt. Canned food was overturned. There were signs someone had left in a hurry, but there were no signs of violence and no blood, just chaos. And not far from this eerie campsite, authorities found Sandra's car. It had crashed into a tree. The airbags were deployed, but Sandra wasn't there. That was the moment the search began. A local coordinated manhunt. Volunteers and professionals. Helicopters scoured the ridgelines. Ground crews swept the forest. Dogs sniffed through the brush. But the deeper they looked, the more confusing it became. A few days later, Sandra was reportedly seen by two hikers. She was barefoot. Her clothes were torn. She was alone. The hikers offered help, asked if she was okay. Sandra said she was fine. Then she walked away into the trees. They didn't know she was a missing person. Not yet. When the hikers later learned about Sandra's disappearance, they immediately reported the encounter. Authorities went back into the woods, but by then, it was too late. Sandra had disappeared again. Why was she walking barefoot? Why did she turn down help? And more chillingly, why hadn't she called for help herself? She had a cell phone. There was no record of her using it. In the weeks that followed, searchers found more of Sandra's items. Her ID, some clothes, a sleeping bag. But it wasn't a trail leading to her. It was a trail leading nowhere. Like she had been shedding parts of herself in the woods, piece by piece. And then, nothing. Nothing. The trail went cold. Until October, 3 months later, when a strange new report surfaced. A man living near Johnsen Meadows, miles from the original search area, claimed Sandra had knocked on his door. She looked thin, injured, dazed, but alive. He asked if she needed help. She refused. And then, just like before, she vanished into the trees. No one has seen her since. The official search ended, but the questions never did. What really happened in those woods? Some say Sandra suffered a head injury in the car crash, that it left her confused, disoriented, and wandering without understanding how much danger she was in. Others believe she may have had a mental health crisis, driven by grief, isolation, and trauma. But there's another theory, one that doesn't involve confusion or injury. One that suggests Sandra may not have wanted to be found. There were no signs she was running from anything, but there were also no signs she was staying put. What if Sandra made a choice to vanish? Some wilderness experts believe it's possible. With survival skills and enough determination, a person can live off-grid for quite some time. But even the best prepared hikers eventually leave signs. Sandra left chaos. Then, silence. That's not typical. What makes Sandra's case so haunting is the near misses. The hikers who saw her but didn't realize she needed help. The camper who opened his door and then watched her walk away. She was so close to being saved, and yet, just out of reach. It's rare for a missing person to be seen twice, alive, after a disappearance. Rarer still to vanish again, twice into the same forest. Which brings us to one last disturbing question. Was someone else out there? Some online theorists have suggested darker possibilities, that Sandra may have encountered someone in the woods, someone dangerous, and that her scattered items were signs of a struggle or escape. There is no evidence of this, no foul play confirmed, but there's also no closure. And for her family, that's the hardest part. Sandra Johnsen Hughes didn't just disappear. She left behind a void, a series of unsolved puzzles that don't quite fit. A smart woman with survival skills. A crash, a torn-up campsite, 2 sightings, and then nothing. How can someone so clearly seen, so nearly saved, simply fade into the forest? 3 years later, the questions remain, and the trail is still silent. But out there, in the shadows of the Sierra National Forest, someone remembers. Someone saw. And maybe, one day, someone will speak. Until then, the mystery of Sandra Johnsen Hughes will remain one of the strangest disappearances in America's wilderness. If you found this case as unsettling as we did, share your thoughts below. Do you believe Sandra wanted to disappear, or was she trying to find her way out all along? Let's keep her story alive, because even in silence, she deserves to be heard.